Welcome, I'm Mark Richards, and this is the AWI Challenge Dialogue. I'll be your host today, and our subject is going to be how do third parties come up with pricing? How do they create their pricing? Joining me today is Brent Blackmon. Brent, welcome.
Good morning.
We're glad that you're here. Brent is the new business development manager at United Warehouse Company in Tulsa. Also joining us this morning is going to be Erik Holck. Erik is with Port Jersey, and he is the business development manager. Erik, glad you're with us. And Sean Mueller. Sean is the special projects manager at Evans Distribution Systems in Detroit. Sean's also the producer of this video cast. So, Sean, thank you for your help, and thank you for being here this morning.
Thanks, Mark.
And then finally, special introduction to someone I've known since I was a baby almost. Ken Ackerman.
Hi.
First time I met Ken, I was still a student at Miami of Ohio, and I don't know if I fooled him or what, but he ended up hiring me when I got out of school. So special place in my heart for Ken. Those of you that don't know Ken, he's quite a guru in the industry. Ken is the founder of KB Ackerman Company. This is a management advisory company focused on logistics, supply chain, warehousing. But just about any question you have for Ken about warehousing and logistics, he's the man. He can answer that. So we're really pleased to have him with us today. Sean, why don't you hold up what you had a moment ago that you...
Yeah, he's not only the expert, but it seems like he also wrote the book, it looks like. So, big fan over here.
He wrote the book, yeah. So, Ken, again, thank you for being with us. We appreciate it very much. As I mentioned, our topic today is going to be how does a third party create their pricing? And what I found over the years is that when someone contacts us looking to outsource, if it's not the first question, it's the second. So tell me, how do you guys come up with pricing? How does a third party come up with pricing? And it's actually a pretty challenging question and a pretty challenging area in our industry, and mysterious. And I know we'll get into that in just a few minutes. So our focus today, we're going to talk about a little bit about how do we do this? Why is it important for you to understand it? What is needed in order for a third party to create accurate pricing? And then how can you, as a user of third-party services, have an impact on that price? So we have a few questions that we're going to throw out to our panelists. Again, welcome, and we'll launch right into those questions now. So the first question is, why is it important for a user to understand how pricing is created? And I'd like to go ahead and ask Ken if he could respond to this question first, and then we'll hear from the rest of the panelists. So Ken, why is it important?
Well, obviously, pricing should be a reflection of costs. And to have a good price, you need to know your costs. And the buyer wants to be sure that he doesn't leave money on the table and overpay. But if he or she has any intelligence at all, they also know that a low price below cost that puts the vendor in a position of loss is going to create a very short relationship. So the right price is one that the vendor gets a reasonable markup and the buyer gets a reasonable price. And the trick on this in warehousing is to know your costs. And the strange thing about this industry, which is thousands of years old, is that really, until the last few decades, very, very few people knew how to apply any industrial engineering to get at the handling cost. The storage cost was easy, but the handling cost is something, it's more art than science, and it is even in our computer 21st century age, there is both an art and a science. And so it's a tricky situation.
So it is mysterious, as we were saying earlier.
That's right. It is mysterious. And there have been some some funny things that have happened. In Seanstown, there was a guy in my early years in this business who was something of a joker. He had a client come to visit. He said, "Now I want to take you in this room and show you our pricing department." And he'd take the guy in, and on the table was a Ouija board and a crystal ball. His idea of humor. But things have come a long way since then, but there is still more art than science in determining warehousing costs.
So we all have Ouija boards in our closets, right? Excellent.
Well, there's another example that illustrates how tricky this is. A multi-city warehousing firm that Mark is familiar with had a training session with 10 managers, all given a fictitious case with the same set of assumptions, and said, use our standard formula and figure the rate. And how many different rates do you think they got with 10 people in the room?
12.
Yeah,
12.
right. Because each respondent looked at the numbers and used some different assumptions, all of which shows it's not a science.
Excellent. Great, Ken. I appreciate that. So, one of the key learnings that I picked up from that is that when a purchaser understands how pricing is arrived, it can really go a long ways as far as the quality of the relationship and quality, which to me is the foundation. You start with that price, and if you have a great price and everybody thinks it's a great and accurate price, then you can accomplish lots of things and you can overcome a lot of hurdles. If you don't, somebody in that relationship is not going to be happy.
Yeah. If I could just add something.
Sure, Brent.
I would say that what we have when we're talking to a client about his business, we need to understand where they're coming from, what that business is. In many cases, we deal with customers that are similar, maybe, and we'll have some assumptions because we have a lot of experience in many different industries. That doesn't always relate exactly, specifically to any individual client. So it's not like talking to your doctor and trying to describe symptoms. The doctor needs to understand exactly how you're feeling, and even though you might say, well, it hurts here, or when I get up in the morning, I get dizzy, those kinds of things are the beginning of an understanding. But before the doctor can really make a good diagnosis, Ken's point is that he really needs to eliminate assumptions and try to come up with what are the real facts. In many cases, that's just subjective for the customer or the client of the warehouse trying to describe those things. And but the better we can nail that down, then the better partner we're going to be at understanding what the requirements are. Once we understand the requirements, then we have a better handle on what the costs are going to be.
I think Brent hit the nail right on the head there. The more assumptions we can eliminate, the better we do, because at that point we know exactly where our costs need to be applied, and it's our job to educate these customers. A lot of times what happens is the first question I'm asked is, well, what's your price? I say, well, what is it that you do? Give me some information. With that, then I can help you also. Not only I can do more than just provide a price, I can then help you reduce your cost by sharing some best practices that I've seen as to how to eliminate that cost. So if you're bringing in floor-loaded containers, if you can cube out that container, if somebody's not doing that, maybe I can help them do that. Determine where the cost benefit is to bring in a palletized container versus a floor-load container, just based on the product.
Excellent. So part of what I'm hearing here is that the more the customer understands the process of pricing, hopefully that relates to them having more information or sharing more symptoms and maybe more accurately, which then helps you as the doctor to come up with a prescription or price that is the best fit for them.
Exactly.
Excellent. Great, guys. I appreciate the input there. Let's go ahead and move on to our next question. And Erik, I'd like you to go ahead and chime in on this one. And here's the question. What are the general cost elements that form the basis of pricing? So what are the elements or components that go into the price?
So in any warehouse operation, there's really two buckets that any cost can go into, either the storage bucket or the handling bucket. Now, each company applies their cost of the operation a little bit differently. They might split it from one to the other. They might allocate things differently. But at the end of the day, there are really two components of it: storage and handling. Now, from there, every single cost that's involved in an operation, from the rent of the building, from the electric, the gas, the personnel, the office administration, the computers, it's all incorporated into that. And at the end of the day, however each company breaks it down, it comes down to two rates. Your storage rate, some people look at it based on cubic feet, some people look at it based on square feet. We look at it based on square feet here. The other one is a handling number. Now for us, we use a productive hourly rate, which is a summary of our total handling costs. And from there, based on productivity standards, we can come up with a rate for just about anything using those two main numbers.
Okay, great. So storage or space, and then labor, right?
Mm-hmm.
What about systems? You have computer systems, you have phones. Or where do you put that?
Again, it's a case-by-case basis for us. Anything that is involved in, we ask the question: does just having the space, does this part of the business add to just having the space or to operating the space? If it's operating the space, then we put it in the handling bucket. If it's having the space, then we put it more into the actual storage bucket.
Okay, great. Sean, Ken, Brent, anything you want to add to that? Sean, how about you first?
Yeah, absolutely. No, I think I think those are great points. I think flexibility is a big part of that conversation too. I think both you as the vendor and the potential client really need to be flexible, and kind of getting back to Ken's point, right? You're really trying to identify the costs, and then you're trying to identify a margin that works for the provider. And you're doing that based on some facts you've identified, and there's always going to be a handful of assumptions, right? And you're trying to get to this magic number, and a lot of times I think, again, the flexibility is really important as you move through the relationship. You set the pricing up front, but both parties need to be flexible because, again, a lot of those assumptions and the conversations initially end up shifting, and maybe volume goes up, volume goes down. And I think just that ongoing open and transparent conversation about just the pricing and what's going on is really important from both sides.
Okay. So, what I'm hearing is that it really does boil down to those couple of buckets that you have: the storage and handling, maybe a material handling or equipment bucket would be another one. But Ken, one of the things I remember from my days at your company was that we would go through and we would estimate each of those buckets, and here's the cost. So we would come up with, in essence, a budget for that prospect, and then we'd go back to that prospect and say, how do you want to see this? Do you want it allocated on a percentage of sales, or so much per hundredweight, so much per pallet, per square foot, etc.? Is that, am I remembering that right? It's been a few years.
Well, that's the way I remember it also. What I was going to add is the real challenge of dealing with a client who doesn't know his or her own costs. And I had that experience, and I run across it as a consultant. Company that wants a parts depot, has never had a parts depot before, doesn't have any specs, doesn't have any experience, and just says, give me a price. In a condition like that, I think the only answer is time and material, also known as cost plus, because nobody has anything to build a price on. And the cost plus thing is also fairly dangerous, because if it gets old, it gets abused sooner or later. Mm-hmm. So the cost plus, in my view, should always be converted into a unit rate once you have X months, or I'd say a maximum of about a year's experience. You convert it into something that can be audited and is not subject to any abuse. Okay. But it is a tricky business.
Yeah, so this actually, your comments lead into our third question, and that third question was, if you could give a third party or someone that's going to be using a third party one piece of advice, what would it be? And what I just heard you say was make sure that you, user of third party services, know your cost.
Yeah.
Right?
And if you don't, you really have no choice but to go to a time and material, so many square feet, so many hours, and then it's all built on trust. And the trust is the operative word there.
Okay, great. How about Brent? Could you answer that same question? If you could give people one piece of advice, what would it be in order to get accurate pricing?
Well, I certainly like what Ken said about knowing your costs, but I think the other side of knowing what your costs are, knowing what's valuable to your customers, know what matters to your customers, and then you'll be able to understand what's valuable in the warehouse. It's easy to say that you need quality in your warehouse, you need speed, you need responsiveness. All of those things come with a cost, and if you understand the value that you need to create for your customers, then you can describe that to the warehouse, and we're in a better position then to help you achieve those objectives responsibly, cost effectively. And so if I were to give just one piece of advice, know what's really valuable to your customers, whether that is product security, whether it is packaging at the last minute before you deliver to your end customer, whether that's responsiveness, whether it's quality checking or things that you might have to report to your customer. All of those things matter, and I would say that sometimes we get accounts that may be unrealistic in their expectations about what that value is, and so then you have a cost that doesn't line up with their value expectations. Keep in mind that our job is not just to make our customer happy with our cost, but to make our customer's customer happy with the cost, the delivered cost of the product. And so if we encourage a customer to, after a quality standard or a speed standard that's not necessarily valuable to their customer, then they're going to end up being either too costly in the marketplace, and they're going to lose business to their competitors. So what we have to do is be a real partner in not only delivering value, but in defining what that value is to begin with. One example I would say, it's like the difference between, say, diamonds and cardboard boxes. If some customers we have are paper products, and we have other customers that have very high-end things that are extremely valuable. The cost of security is tremendously different for each of those things. It's not easy to carry home a pallet full of corrugate, but small electronics or highly valuable things, even cigarettes, tobacco, and alcohol can be highly sensitive to security and quality controls, even compliance. So a lot of issues that need to be examined that the customer really needs to think about before they just go get a warehouse. Really try to match up that value that they expect for their customers with this idea of knowing what your cost is.
Excellent. So it sounds like we're getting back to know your business again, not just from a cost standpoint, but know what your expectations are. Know, I'm putting this on the user, right? The user of the third party. Before you go to a third party, not only understand your cost, but understand your expectations and be able to articulate what's important to you.
Well, and that's the best scenario, but the reality is that we deal with people all the time that are new or startup, and as Ken pointed out, many times don't know. And so we may enter into a relationship knowing that we don't know, but we expect to learn, we expect to grow. So I wouldn't be afraid to rely on your professional, your warehouse professional, to help guide you and lead you in some of these things. The more you've thought about it, the better off you're going to be helping your warehouse professional. But at the same time, many times we have some expertise in a specific industry that you won't even imagine that we've had before. but we can help lead and guide in many cases to get to that point where we both understand what the value is that you're trying to create for your customer.
Great. Great. Thanks, Brent. Erik, what about you? What's that one piece of advice?
So both of you hit on something great between you, Mark, and Brent. Mark, when you said articulate it, that's the biggest thing. Tell me as much as you can about your business. The more information I have, the better I can do on my pricing, the fewer assumptions I have. And Brent, in your terms, when you mentioned value, that's the other biggest part of it. What is important to you? Do you want it good and accurate? Because then it won't be cheap. Do you want it cheap and good? Because then it won't be accurate. It's all about what's important to the customer. And again, just going back to knowing more about the account, that's important to me. I want to know how product's coming in, how it's going out, how you expect us to store it, because all that, at the end of the day, ties back into those two buckets, your storage bucket and your handling bucket. And at the end of the day, the less assumptions we have there, the better we can be with our pricing. And in a perfect world for me, all I want to be able to do is negotiate my profit margin with my customers, because our cost is our cost. There's nothing we can do about it. It's our job to keep our costs down. But at the end of the day, if we can simply negotiate that profit margin, then we're being transparent with you, just as we hope you are with us as a customer.
Ken, you did lead us into this question, but I want to give you one more opportunity. 20 seconds. What's the one piece of advice?
Trust. If you don't trust the vendor, or vice versa, head for the door. The good relationship should be based on each one desiring for the other one to make a reasonable profit. I emphasize reasonable, but there has to be a lot of trust. And as this business gets more sophisticated, the ability to really gauge costs gets more difficult, not less difficult.
Excellent. Great. Thank you. Great. So now we're going to go on to the next question. And Sean, I'd like you to go ahead and respond to this first. And the question is there a way that the user can have an impact on cost? Are there things that they can do that will result in the cost going up, or things that they can do to result in the cost going down?
Yeah, absolutely. And again, I think it goes back to a comment Erik made. I think oftentimes the customers coming in and saying, "What's your price?" Right? And that, I think neither for the customer nor for the partner is that a good situation to just present a price, because back to Ken's early statement, if it's not working for the vendor, it's going to be a short relationship, right? So I think, this very much is a two-way conversation to get to the right price. Again, it's in the best interest of both parties. You, as has been said, you identify all the facts. You then get into the assumptions and really try to hone those assumptions as much as you can. There's going to be assumptions. I think the customer may try to inflate those a little bit, but you want to get as accurate as possible. And again, I think for the customer, there's a lot of valuable knowledge that they'll learn through that process, whether it's their own costs, what they're looking for, as Erik mentioned. But there's a lot of value in just digging into their business. And again, that's a two-way conversation, right? It's impossible for a 3PL to come to the table with all the information regarding that customer. And I think in an industry like ours, where it's such a diverse range of services and products and businesses, you've got to go through that process.
Okay, great. Now, Erik, how about yourself? Is there anything the customer can do to either increase their cost or decrease it? Can they manage it?
It really comes down to looking at alternatives based on our knowledge of best practices. I know I mentioned it before, but in terms of cubing out a container, if somebody's bringing in palletized freight and it's light and they're only getting 20 pallets worth of product on a container, I'm going to go back to them and tell them flat out, you can reduce the total number of containers that you import by floor loading it. You're going to get more product on there. You're going to drive your cost down. Now, that might not impact their cost with me as a service provider, but it's going to reduce their overall manufacturing cost or cost of goods delivered. To me, that's important. Any advice I can give them, whether it pertains to my business or not, then that's great. So, for example, one thing that happens in our business a lot is sometimes lot codes aren't clearly marked on product. So instead of spending 15 minutes trying to find a lot code for an entire inbound, if it's clear on the cases, it's going to make the receiving process so much simpler. And then at that point, we can go back to them and say, by doing this, you're going to reduce your total handling cost because it takes us less time. So there's a lot that can be done to reduce the total cost. It's just a matter of having that open dialogue and that conversation, and them really trusting us to be the experts and giving them any advice that we can.
Okay, so from a customer perspective, again, I always want to be looking at what can I do to make the handling more efficient, or make the storage more efficient, or transportation, reducing the moves, etc. One thing that I remember when I was on the shipper side that I was always looking at was inventory turn. If I could improve our inventory turn, that was going to have a direct impact on my warehousing storage cost. Ken, why don't you talk about that a little bit? Was I crazy, or does that make sense?
Oh, of course it does. When the inventory just sits, your storage costs are done by the month. But when inventory turns and the handling rate is a profitable one, you have a better revenue situation. When you can put two cases on the same square foot each month because it's turning 24 times a year, it's a more attractive situation than dead storage. Although if the rate is really done correctly, it's easy to say and hard to do, you should make money whether it turns or not. But the trick is to understand what happens in the effect of the turns on the overall warehousing revenue.
Great. So, gentlemen, we're about out of time, so I want to go ahead and wrap this up a little bit. Hopefully, through our conversation, what we've been able to share are some of the things that are important if you're a user of third-party services, reasons why you need to understand pricing. The more you understand pricing, the more you're going to realize that you need to provide that provider of services with as much detail as you can. Help them minimize those assumptions. As they minimize those assumptions, that minimizes risk. That relates to a better price. Recognize that it really just boils down to storage and handling. But again, the more you know, the better able you are to calculate that and then, again, come up with a price. And then, to me, there's always going to be that mystery, right? There's always going to be a mystery. We're going to make assumptions. We're going to document those assumptions so that we know what we base this on. But stuff happens. And we're not going to anticipate everything, so there will be assumptions made. If you have trust, that keyword trust, you can work through it. So, gentlemen, I want to thank you again for your comments today. Great job. I know that we brought a lot of value to the community here. So, Brent, Erik, Ken, Sean, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys. And for those of you that are watching, thank you for your time. We hope that we've brought some value to you today. And be looking for that next episode of AWI Challenge Dialogue. If you'd like to reach us, there are a number of ways that you can do that. You can email us at mark, M-A-R-K, at awilogistics.com. You can visit our website, awilogistics.com, or you can call 714-538-5990. We'd love to hear from you, hear about those questions that you have about outsourcing, and then we'll make sure that we provide you with some answers. Thank you, everyone.